In this lesson, we'll begin to build the latches for our case. So again, we're going to be building two identical latches, so we only really need to build one, and then we can duplicate it over. So let's begin by just bringing in a primitive cube. So it's going to be kind of our first piece of new geometry here. We'll kind of bring it over into this slot, and then we can begin to add a little bit of shape to it. So we can come in here to the creation node, we can change the width, and let's make it a little bit narrower. So we'll kind of bring this in a little bit. Want to leave a little bit of room on the outside of it. All right, and let's go ahead and take the height down a little bit. Let's take the depth down a bit. So get something like that. And it can kind of sit right on top there. Move this over a little. Let's add a few subdivisions here. So along the width, you can add a couple there. You can add a few along the height. Let's add 4 subdivisions. And then let's go ahead and leave that as is. Now I want to do a little bit of shaping on this. So I'm going to take these edges and let's begin to pull this down. So I'm going to pull this straight in along this z-axis. Let's do the same thing here. Kind of pull this down a little bit and create kind of a curve shape there. So we end up with something like that. Now if you smooth it, you can see it softens up quite a bit. So we can either add edges here, or I know that we can just delete those polygons because they're going to be inside the top part of the latch. And then when we smooth it, since that's a border, it's going to be nice and hard. Now we do want us to sharpen up this edge along the side. So let's go ahead and just use our Insert Edge Loop tool to do that. And that tightens that up a little bit. And that sort of gives us the bottom part of our latch. Now maybe that's not quite tight enough, so we can come in, tighten up that edge on that side and over there as well, and make this a little bit wider. Maybe something like that. That gives us the bottom part. So let's go ahead and bring in another cube. And this time we'll kind of align it with the cube that we already have in there. Let's go ahead and take our width down again. And this time we'll just take it down so that it fits right inside this opening. So let's increase that till it's just right inside there. Let me take that down just a hair. So maybe something like that. Let's take the height down a little bit and we'll move this up till it's kind of right up in here. Kind of stop right at that base there. All right, let's start to change the depth a little bit. So we'll take that depth down a bit, bring this out. There we go. So maybe something like that. Now I want to start to add a few divisions in here. And so let's go ahead along the width. We'll add a couple of divisions here. Along the height, we can add a few divisions to help us shape it. And then along the depth, let's add at least 1 division in here. Now let's take these 2 edges that are going vertically. I'm going to scale these out just until they're on the other side of our first piece of geometry. Then I'll take these polygons and I want to actually extrude these down, but I also want to kind of create an opening here for this to go up and under. And so before I do that, let's take this edge and just bring it forward. Now we'll take these polygons on the front. Let's go ahead and extrude. We'll kind of extrude that down a little bit. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and just grab these polygons on the side and let's extrude these down. So just extrude them down a little bit. That's a little bit too far. Maybe just something like that. Okay, we can kind of take a look at what this is starting to look like smoothed. So something like that. So I want to add a little bit of shape to this. So let's take these, pull those back. Same thing here. Kind of pull these back a little bit to add a little bit more shape to this. Okay. Now when we smooth it, you can see this really kind of loses its form. And so I want to use the Insert Edge Loop tool to kind of help it retain its form. We'll do the same thing over here on this side. And I also want to have a little bit of a division here. So let me go ahead and drop a couple of edge loops right in here. Okay. And then I'll just put an edge loop right in the middle and right in the middle. And then I'm just going to kind of scale it a little bit. Same thing here. Just to create a little bit of a hint of a seam there. You can kind of see that. Okay. So it gives us kind of the top and bottom of our latch. If we don't like the placement, we can always come in, grab those points, and move them up until it gets to a point where we like it. We can also start to add a few smaller details here. So we can take both of these and let's delete our history. Let's freeze our transformations. Okay. And let's actually group these together. So Control G to group, and then we'll center the pivot. So we've got this now as one piece. Let's just scale this down a little bit in the X. So we've got a little bit more room there, and we can kind of place it. And now I want to create some sort of little rivets to go on the side. And we'll do that just by bringing in a primitive cylinder. And let's kind of bring this over here. And because this is going to be so small, we don't necessarily have to smooth it. We can just add the polygons right into the mesh. So you just want to think about how big is this going to be on screen. So looking at it like that, 16 is just fine for getting a smooth result. So we'll set our subdivisions to 16. Let's add a subdivision on the cap. All right. Let's go ahead now and take those polygons up the top. We'll click, shift double click, and let's extrude those up. Okay. Let's take the polygons at the bottom and we can get rid of those. So I'll just delete them. Can take that bottom vertex or line of vertex vertices and move them up. Okay, that's smoothed out, which we said we weren't going to do. So let's actually just bevel this because I don't want this edge to be quite so sharp. So let's take those edges and remember learning about bevel. Went up and let's just bevel. Change our offset a little bit. So we end up with something like that. Now we'll need to rotate it 90 degrees. We can center our pivot again because it's still based on the original cylinder. Kind of move this into position. We'll scale it down quite a bit and just put it at these different pivot points. And some of these are going to be a little bit more difficult to see, but it'll add to kind of the realism. To duplicate it, Control D. We'll go ahead and move this one down and put it kind of in the center of that spot. Can maybe scale it up a little bit. Make sure it's sort of out of the way. So now if you need to, you can come in and scale this down maybe just a little bit more so it's not hitting the case. Duplicate again, move this over. We do need to rotate it around. So we'll go ahead and rotate this 180 degrees. And then we'll do the same thing here. So duplicate, move it over. We'll rotate it 180 degrees. And all right. Maybe move it in a little bit. We can go into our outliner and check and see what all these pieces are looking like. So here is some of these pieces, and then we have the two pieces that we've got here. So let's take all four of these little pieces. Let's delete our history, and we'll freeze transformations. We'll drop it into the latch group. Okay. Now what we can do here is we'll just go ahead and name this latch left. Let's create a temporary group. So Control G again with the group selected. It'll create a new group with the pivot point at the origin. Now all we have to do is hit Control D to duplicate. We'll scale it across the axis, so scale it -1 in the X direction to flip it over, and then we can freeze our transformations, and we've got a latch over there on the other side. Okay, if you go into your outliner, you can see we've got those two temporary groups. We can drop our latch groups out. Now they are named the same, so we would have to go in now and rename them. And now we have our two latches. All right, so the next thing we want to do is add a handle for our case. So let's go ahead in the next lesson and tackle that.